Hello, everybody!
Open this up in our headphones, Charles.
Woo! Our headphones. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friends, Charles.
Yes, we use the plural friends again today because it is our pleasure to introduce our good friend, reoccurring guest on the show, author of Artifact Space and Hawkward Sword, which is out now, the great Christian / Miles Cameron. Christian, thank you so much for being on the show.
Howdy, friends. It's really great to be here. I think we really are friends, and I think we talk too much.
Yes.
It's apparent off the air. We can't shut up.
With which the time just flows away into that. Anyway, it's great to be here, and let's talk.
Yes, let's talk. We already had a nice 40-minute chat. I'm like, we should probably record some of this for material. That's why we're here after all. And today we have a very special conversation because, as we had mentioned, we have read Artifact Space, written by you, Miles Cameron, our guest. And we wanted to do our typical book discussion. And this is the first time we're doing a book. Well, we did it with Levi Jacobs too, but a book discussion with the author himself. So we're looking forward to getting into all of that spoiler-filled glory about Artifact Space. But before we do that, just want to give you a quick plug here. Guys, Christian Cameron, also known as Miles Cameron, depending on what books you read, prolific author. You can check out Artifact Space if you haven't already. Highly recommend it. And then there's also Hawkward Sword, which is Chivalry book number 5. Fantastic series. You can also catch him over on Twitter at Fokion1. That's Phokion with number 1 at the end, where he does this amazing series called Writing Fighting, these short little videos where he demonstrates all different kinds of knightly arts, and we're going to get into all kinds of fun little gun flints and things like that. So definitely check him out over there. You don't want to miss it. Dylan, why don't you bring us into some of these spoiler warnings so we can go ahead and get into the meat of this?
Yeah, well, first off, before I do the spoiler warning, I just want to say that I loved Artifact Space,
yes,
and I know Charles did too. It's an incredibly unique, inspired book. Unique and inspired as its author, Christian over here. And I highly recommend checking it out. And if you want some spoiler-free content of us talking to Christian, we have an episode a while back that was a just spoiler-free interview. And check out Artifact Space. My strongest endorsement I can give to this. I'm super excited for us to get into the details of the book, which means that we are going to spoil stuff from Artifact Space in this discussion. So now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones if you do not want to get that book spoiled for you. And you don't if you haven't read it yet. So go pick that book up and then come back and join us later when you're done.
Very well said, Dylan. So you have been warned, and without any delay, let's get into the conversation. Artifact Space. Now, Christian, last time you were on, we talked about your inspiration for this book. It came to you in this epiphany after watching the recent release of Little Women, I believe it was.
Which gets a mention in the book.
Yes, which does get a mention in the book. When I read that moment, I was like, aha.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just remind us and some of our listeners where all the inspiration came from for Artifact Space?
I love telling this story, so yes.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, I'm going to start before the movie Little Women. I'm going to start, I think, 3 years ago at Galans Fest when my hero, Alistair Reynolds, the premier science fiction space opera writer, I don't know, alive today, he was sitting several rows in front of me at Galans Fest, and I realized the seat next to him was empty. And because while there are many things I'm afraid of socially, Alistair Reynolds isn't one of them. I just went and plonked down next to him and fanboyed in all directions. And then we had like a 3-hour conversation about life on aircraft carriers, because it turns out he's a huge fan, the right word? He's interested in
enthusiast
aircraft carriers. And he basically said like, oh, I've always thought they were like the closest things to starships that we have now. So we had a big, long conversation. And at some point he said, you should write a science fiction novel. And Gillian Redfern, my editor from Galance, literally leaned over from the seat behind and said, I'd buy that. And I think I said this to you guys the last time, but when you're a full-time professional writer and your editor tells you that she'll buy something, you go like, ding. So that was part one. And then I didn't do anything with it because I had contracts for all the Cold Iron Masters and Mages books. And then now we're getting to the movie theater. So I was actually for Tom Swan, which is an ongoing series, 15th century James Bond that I write for fun, really, because there's only about 9 people who've ever read it. I was doing research on how exactly the great galleys of Venice and Florence worked and the routes that they sailed. And I was totally fascinated how these giant ships sort of pinned the Middle Ages together and allowed certain forms of international travel. And that was cool. And then just before COVID, my family went to see Little Women, which all of us we'd read it aloud as a family. We all loved the book. And the movie looked really, really good in the trailers, and off we all went to a real movie theater. I know COVID has gone on so long in Canada. I'd like you all to cast your minds back to the days when you could sit in a movie theater with other people.
Right.
And I can tell you to the scene, Amy is just telling the boy, gosh, my mind just went blank. She's just telling him like, well, I'm not a great artist, so all that's left to me now is having some rich guy's babies. I'm paraphrasing. It's much better written than that.
Yeah.
Right.
And the whole plot of Artifact Space dropped into my head. And it was originally called Amy in Space. And then it went through various transformations, and Amy ended up as an orphan in an orphanage. But that was like the sort of original impulse was a sort of proto-feminist, like, what if the heroine has a whole bunch of different options? And how does she control those options? And how does she get from point A to point B? And that was part of it. But of course, the great galleys became the great ships, and the aircraft carrier contributed. Anyway,
it all
but
came together.
the amazing part, and probably the part that writers either do or don't want to hear about, is how much of that just went bing in my head. And this is the part that's hard to describe, and yet I've now encountered like 10 other writers who say, oh, I've had this happen. An old ballet instructor of mine likes to say art makes art, that looking at other people's art helps you make your own. And I think that's the experience I had, but it was like a revelation. It just went bing. And, I've said it was all there. There's a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't there, which was like exactly how great ships worked and like the star map and where they're going. But the essentials were so much there that I then wrote the whole thing in 45 or 46 days.
Wow.
That's very impressive. Yeah, I remember you mentioning that, and I was reading through this story kind of through that lens to kind of see how the influence kicked off the story. And one of the things you had mentioned multiple times in your explanation just now is that you're studying like, life on great ships, life on these big merchant ships, trade ships, things like that. And I was talking to Dylan about this book in preparation for our conversation today, and I was like, it's almost like a slice of life story in that we get so many interesting things happening to our main character in Borrow, but like where the story like also shines is how it kind of balances these elements of these like exciting things like mystery and conspiracy and space warfare. There's even a little bit of romance and stuff, but you always go back to the crew mess, and Borrow is socializing with people. They're talking about a mission. They're running simulations. She's landing ships. It's like, how were you able to balance some of these more exciting storytelling elements with this almost slice of life on the ship, just getting to know Borrow and her friends? And what was your intention in like balancing it in that way?
I've got like 3 strings on this bow. So one is, I think experience is essential to writing. So I actually have the experience of being a junior naval aviator on an aircraft carrier. And I know what I'm about to say is banal, but it's like excitement, adventure, and terror interspersed with utter boredom and incredibly repetitious, endless training. We used to call it training to train, right? You just like, I've done this 8,000 times. Only when you then have to do it while you're half asleep and people are shooting at you, do you ever realize like, oh, they really wanted me to know how to do this, even when I had no brain cells at all, right? So I wanted to capture that element. And I'm going to say a really weird thing, but at times I wanted you to be bored. I know that's a weird, like it's, if my editor ever hears me say this on this, I will probably lose all future writing because deliberately boring the reader is a way to get you to close the book and never read it again. And while I get that, 2 things that I don't really like when I read are affectless violence and affectless sex. But I would add to that affectless action that has no affect on the character except to give you an action scene. And one of my remedies for that is to force you to experience a little bit of the endless routine. Right. You know, it just goes on and on and on. And I also tried to stud like early conversation with some of the veterans saying to Enbaro, like, oh, wait till you're really out there. Then you'll understand how boring it is, right? And like in an adventure novel, and space opera is always about adventure, you always think like, oh, it's going to be nonstop action. And I can tell you from my experience of like several carrier cruises and an actual war that far from being nonstop action, it's almost nonstop boredom. And if you imagine, like, let's talk about Star Trek. I love Star Trek. Okay, they tell the truth right up front. A 5-year mission. And then every episode is like, and another alien entity is taking over the ship. Right? You never have an episode of like Sulu's life as a watchstander, sitting there going like,
day to day.
We are going exactly the same place we were going yesterday.
Cool, black nothingness. Okay.
Oh yes, sir. Absolutely nothing happened again.
And that's super interesting. I would kind of push back on that like boredom aspect because and I know Dylan has something he wants to say about that. So Dylan, why don't you chime in here?
Well, to me, I know you said it's going to sound banal to say the boredom thing, and that's something that actually set this book apart in a lot of ways for me. Was I think in Game of Thrones and a bunch of other books I've read the like telling of a line like war is boredom with lots of intense like random moments, but most of it's boredom. But I feel like it's told, not shown, and I don't want to say that you showed boredom in a sense of like eliciting that feeling for me, but to me, the word that kept coming up for me was real and like honest and genuine was what it felt like when I was reading those times that maybe you would describe as boring, but I'm like, I don't know. It just felt exactly like what would happen if you put a bunch of people together on this giant great ship. And it's like, what are they going to do during all this time? They're going to hang out and make friends and date and get to know each other and start to fall for one person and then be like, oh, I don't know if I'm into them. And then that person will fall for their friend. It's like, I've been in situations with lots of people around and time, and I'm sure a lot of people have too. And that's the kind of stuff that happens. And to me, it's like, instead of it feeling like, oh, I came in for a space warfare novel and now I'm bored with this romance, it's like, I love romance. Like, I love seeing well-written, true-feeling romance. I love well-written, true-feeling slice of life. I love well-written, true-feeling space battles. And to me, it's like the quote-unquote boredom just felt like a really genuine portrayal of what life would actually be like on that spacecraft. And I loved it because I called you last time a Renaissance man in medieval armor, and I stand by it, even though I know you think the Renaissance is the period gets a lot of credit it doesn't deserve. But that being said, the idea of someone who has all of these sides and so many aspects of their personality, like you, Christian, I saw all of that coming through in your ability to write basically like 5 or 6 different subgenres well within the context of one book. So I think it's like I'd recommend it to people with that in mind, so they don't be like, I came for space battles only, and then they're like confused. But if they know you and they know kind of how many facets you have to yourself and that you do it all well, I don't think they'll be bored. I think they'll have the experience I had, which was being like, this is like 6 great books in one.
Dylan, your flattery is wonderful. I'm just going to interrupt you to go back and say, Charles said a completely true thing. It is like a slice of life. That was my aim. It wasn't just, look, I'm not going to try and pretend to be a great writer, but I am going to say one of the things that sometimes over frustrates me in like epic fantasy, which I also write, is that because they're plot driven, they're utterly false. Because you and I know that our lives are not plot driven. In fact,
they're not.
Our lives are sometimes kind of random.
Right.
And when I write Against All Gods, which is the next thing you'll see from me probably next spring, look, I tried to write my very best epic fantasy, so you can judge it on that, and it is very plot driven. But I had this chance, and this is sort of what came to women. If you read Little Women, you're reading, I think, a truly great novel, but it is almost plotless. Like, yes, it's a coming of age story, and yes, it's about Jo basically learning that she doesn't want to be a housewife. She wants to be a writer, and that's all fascinating. But that's almost background, right? Because you're seeing like what it's like to deal with your father being a wounded Civil War soldier, what it's like to be sort of stuck in the middle between rich and poor, where you're trying to be a good Christian and take care of the poor people, and the rich people kind of piss on you. Like it's just slice after slice of experiential whatever.
Right.
I really like that.
Right.
And so while it does tell a thematic story, I somebody's going to write in and go, that's not what Little Women is about at all, and that's fine. But to me, it's a theme or a story arc, but it's told in a million thin slices of literally daily life and routine.
That's
excellent.
Yeah.
And it is that kind of feeling that I was trying to get across. And I will say, like, there's a technique here, and it's not secret. By having Embaro be junior and young, and having only seen the world of the spaceship basically in simulators, we get to have her be naive and not really know, keep experiencing things for the first time, right? So that even while I'm reflecting the intensity of routine, or what I jokingly called boredom, it's not routine to the reader.
Right.
And it's kind of fun for the reader. It should be like, oh, you're going on EVA, you're going outside the ship, right? So like, well, you know, and at one point, I spoiler, but like she's saying that she feels that the motions of replacing antennas on the hull are the same motions that peasants have been doing for thousands of years planting crops. Like, sure, it's a boring job. And then on the other hand, I'm hoping the reader's going like, take me. I'll definitely go and replace antennas on the hull of a giant spaceship. Please let me be bored.
Yeah,
right.
And that was sort of my technique, is like, oh, you're getting to train for 0G close combat.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. But that to me is what makes Artifact Space shine so well. Because you were mentioning like, oh, this idea of almost plotlessness. Certainly in the beginning, you set up so many plots. We have this like political intrigue. There's stuff going on with the starfish. There's stuff going on with all these ships exploding and things like that. And all this like spy stuff. But it doesn't feel like it, you know, had the rising action and then you had the climax and it's like all these stories resolved and came back in the third act, because you had couched it, like you said, in so many of these thin slices of things that Embaro's doing. Like she's going off ship. She's going on a date with someone she has, you know, not the most exciting feelings in the world, but she likes the guy enough to like go on a date. She's like bartering with people. She's, going
Mhm.
out on her EVAs, cleaning the ship. She's making these routines. She's going to debriefing meetings and things like that. And it's the balance of all this new stuff through Mbaro's eyes, with the routine, with the slice of life, with the exciting plot points. Like, you managed to balance it all like so uniquely and so well to tell the story of Mbaro. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is Mbaro's like arc in this book specifically, in a book that's like, inspired by slice of life with all these different plot points, like what's happening to Mbaro throughout the story. And to me, the thing that was most fascinating about her is this idea of her role as a leadership and her growing as a person, just all these subtle changes that have happened from the beginning through just like seeing her friends every day and landing the ship 100 times and people like encouraging her just by, being like, oh, nice job. That through enough of that happening, she actually grows into quite a competent leader, and her overcoming that is something that I found super interesting. And there's a quote from the book that Dylan and I picked out that I'd love to get your notes on as the author, Christian. It's a short little quote, and I hate to censor you, but there is one of those 4-letter words that we're gonna just skip over here really quickly. So the quote is, "Don't let your S word orphanage upbringing make you forget how good most people are." And that to us is a great quote. I was wondering if you could like shine some more light on Mbaro's arc and that quote specifically.
I think it's my turn to praise you guys. You have literally pulled the quote on which the book is built.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're fist pumping on Zoom.
Yeah.
No, really. And like,
Yeah.
Okay, again, not trying to sound like I have a PhD in English literature, because I really don't. But Mbaro's arc is almost the reverse of Joe's in Little Women. Joe comes from an incredibly strong, almost magically perfect family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's Leave It to Beaver combined with the Waltons, probably both before your time. Everything about her family is great. Her father is great. Her mother is great. Her sisters are great. One of the most moving actions of the novel is one of her sisters dies, and like that part of the family is gone forever, and they're all in deep mourning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at a level, again, I don't have a PhD in English literature. The novel is about one member of the family learning to be herself, separate from the family, and maybe not do the normal middle-class Christian, marry the right person, have a pile of kids thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, then Mmbaro is going on the absolute opposite trajectory. She is absolutely herself. She's been forced to be herself by basically being in prison camp. And through the whole novel, she's learning to have a family and to trust other people, and to think of solutions outside her own head, and to rely on other people. And she's forced to rely on other people in little stupid stuff. And, one thing, like, every writer is taught this, but I'm just going to say it for the benefit of anybody who's learning to write, who's listening. Every one of those scenes, every slice we just talked about, I try to have it do at least 2 things. So it's experiential, but it's usually trying to provide you with some little clue, either a foreshadowing of another scene or some little hint of information about a plot development. And I've been told that I'm too subtle about that sort of thing. So I admit it. Sometimes even my editor is like, was this trying to tell me something? Because I didn't get that. But
I like
one
it
thing
personally.
is pretty constant.
Yeah, same.
And I don't say it right out. I think you guys got it. I think a lot of readers, judging from reviews, have gotten this, is that she's learning that, like, the person putting fuel in her space plane, she has to rely on that guy or girl. And that is antithetical to her initial encounter, right? So when Spacer 2 is offering to put embroidery on her spacesuits, and she's like, what do you want?
Yeah.
Right? And like, sorry, but we can all be that person, right? Like, I think we've all, like, when you're depressed or angry, you're at that end of the spectrum. And then when you're in a good mood and you've had your coffee, you love everyone, and you're more trusting. But one of the weirdest lessons I learned from the military is how very efficient a trust-based society is. And a lot of the things the military tries to do that are probably opaque if you've never been in the military is to get you to get along with all of your mates, right? And my favorite pilot used to say, the aircraft carrier is like high school, except there's no girls and you can't leave. And that is a chilling and accurate statement. Like, so I made it high school where you couldn't leave, but there were girls. And like there's a I'm sort of going back to Dylan's relationship thing. Like I wanted to capture that experience I think everyone has, that when you're in the hothouse of intensity that is being trapped together, that like, everything from sexual partners on the one hand to, I mean, I was in an all-male aircraft carrier and I don't roll that way, so that wasn't my experience. But you do all those stupid high school shit things like liking and hating people for no reason. Like, and then that rolls over and then you're like, oh, he's totally fine. Or, oh, he was riding me and being a dick, but actually now that we've been together for 3 months, he's fine. Or, whoa, he is really a dick and I'm going to avoid him like the plague. Like mostly by the end of 5 months, incidentally, the only people you hate are the people who do no work, because there's so much work that you can get along with all the people who are egocentric and eccentric and weird, but the people who don't do their work, you're just like, I want you to. Anyway.
Talking to you, it's so obvious to see, again, like you had mentioned this earlier, all the like life experience and research experience that you have coming through in this story. It's what really makes the character of Embaro stick out, and these moments in between the plot that we're talking about. It's like, it's so interesting.
Yeah, and I'm hearing you again, Christian, that when you find the people that don't do their work are the only ones you really end up having a problem with, it goes back to those elements of this trust-based society. And the word that I'm thinking about now is duty. Right? Like all these people are able to find what their actual role is, whether it's putting on embroidery or whatever. And if they're able to stick to that role and do their duty, then things fall into place no matter what kind of personality they're expressing, right? Like, it's a trust-based society.
It's a trust-based society. And also, like, you can leave your priceless whatever sitting on a table and nobody steals it. And you although you can't trust people with food. That is a very weird thing that I learned on like if there's cherry pie and there's not enough cherry pie to go around, war will happen. People will kill.
Pie was like one of the most valuable currencies on the Athens. And it's also, but you can use that kind of environment of like doing your work and stuff as part of your character building, which you did. It reminds me of the scenes where Embaro was trying to track down her laundry, and the laundry crew was like, who are you? Get out of here telling us how to do our job. It's not here, it's gone forever. But then she, goes through her moment of bravery and she comes back and there's her laundry like all clean and pressed, and they gave her like extra special attention. And it's like, things are changing in this book, and we were able to see it just through everyday life. You didn't have to be like, oh, and then the laundry guy came up and hugged me and said, well done, I was really impressed with what you did. It's like, we know those laundry guys can be dicks and it's impossible to get your laundry back. So the act of just having it delivered and prepared special has this huge impact to it, both as Embaro as a character and the dynamic of the people on the ship and what they value. It's really fascinating.
It's funny, and I'll just tell this story super fast. That really happened to me in a different way, and it had a completely different ending. So my first cruise, I had 2 nice white linen shirts because I didn't like go on shore in jeans and a t-shirt like every other person, and I wanted to look like a European, which I usually pulled off because we were in the Mediterranean. And so I had these 2 nice white linen shirts, and they disappeared, and that pissed me off. So I went down to laundry, and I wasn't making that part up. Like laundry way down in the ship where officers never go. And but it had a completely different resolution. The chief petty officer came out and found my shirts in like 90 seconds. And he's like, sir, this should never have happened. And everybody was super helpful. And then on my way back out, then another chief petty officer said, "Sir, I don't know what you're doing here, but you should never come down to this deck. You're just making work for people because like everything stops because there's an officer." And I'm like, "Oh, things I didn't know." Like there's a whole other world down there. And I was very junior and very stupid. And I just like, I'm gonna go find my shirts. All I was trying to really get across in that scene, besides sort of starting towards one of the plots with Dornow, was one thing to say a ship is 9 kilometers long. It's another thing to actually like start saying like there's parts of the ship that people don't go to, and there's rats and God knows what else.
Yes.
I never described the things that move around down on the 7th deck. I just let you imagine for yourself what alien creatures are crawling around.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever seen or read Red Dwarf?
Red what?
No.
Red
Dwarf? No.
Oh, no. Never read it.
Sci-fi comedy from the 70s. And it's really cynical and dark and hilarious. And long story short, a guy who works in, I think, the garbage room, wakes up after an accident and discovers that he's the only person left alive on a giant starship. And oh, by the way, 1 million years have passed.
Oh, wow.
And it's very funny because he's so excited that now he's the captain and other dumbass things. That, my wife always says, "Is it like Red Dwarf?" Because it's like the only science fiction she's ever enjoyed in her life. But there were some really good bits, and one of them was like, I'm on a giant starship and I repair the vending machines. Like all those jobs exist.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the other like subplots that I was super fascinated in and loved to watch it evolve through the book was Mbaro's relationship with coffee, because I'm addicted to coffee myself. So from the moment of being like, "Hey, we should buy this," to let's start like tasting it and selling it, like I could tell. And you had mentioned off
and
the
then
air,
she's drinking 15 cups.
Yeah, then she's drinking a lot, and then they had to tell her to stop and all these other things.
Yes.
To me, it's like, okay, this is someone who has a very like meaningful relationship with coffee. And I know we mentioned, I can't remember if it was on the air or not, that you like to go to cafes to do most of your writing, and there's a cafe that you like to frequent. So it's like, I would love to get more light on, from one coffee guy to another, your relationship with coffee, and then like how it's such an important part of Mbaro's world in artifact space.
So, I love coffee, and I used to drink sort of anything I was given, and that was fine. And I still will. I won't lie. Like I'd rather have crap coffee than no coffee. I'm not that snobby. But in Kenya and then later in other African countries, I had the chance to drink really fresh, really good coffee. And Africans know a lot about coffee, and I got some really great lessons from people. And that sort of started me on a different road. And then I would only buy Kenyan coffee because it was the only coffee I quote unquote understood, which is a weird snobbery. And then I started discovering that I really loved particular coffees that weren't necessarily Kenyan. I could go a long way with this. I could bore you bitless. I really
bore us, I promise.
I really enjoy espresso made properly. I really hate it when people don't clean the filter, and so that it tastes like lye.
Tastes like lye.
And almost, wow. Who listens to you guys? Am I going to get in big trouble? American Italian restaurants have a habit of serving really bad espresso and pretending that this is what espresso tastes like. Yeah. And it just drives me bonkers. And I always want to go like, take me to the kitchen. I'll clean your machine.
Yeah.
If you let the oil go in an espresso machine, you get a particular taste. And a lot of Americans and Canadians think that's what espresso tastes like.
Yeah.
And then they get to Italy and go, oh, this is almost sweet. Yeah, that's it's not supposed to have that nasty acid aftertaste.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't trust espresso in most places. It has to be a place that I am confident knows their stuff.
I mean, everywhere we've gone, like Charles and I, when we went to New Zealand, one thing, and it's not like New Zealand is known for their coffee particularly or anything like that, but even there we were struck by how much better the coffee was immediately than the US. And I just feel like there's something we're not doing right over here, but we're a coffee loving country.
Before we go too anti-American, let me say that as far as I'm concerned, the worst coffee in the world is in England, where they believe that if the water is even a pale brown, it counts as coffee. And
we do have some UK listeners, Christian.
And I know that people have said to me, this coffee is too strong, when my mind is screaming, this isn't even coffee.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And, you know, by and large, everybody rags on Starbucks. Starbucks has made world coffee better. They've upped the game because if you can go in London or Glasgow or wherever to a Starbucks, all the other coffee shops have to be at least as good. It's not a high bar, but it's a bar. And that's good. Anyway, yeah, I like coffee. I spend way too much time drinking it. And in fact, if you look at my Instagram feed today, this is the first day we were allowed back in restaurants. So there I am at my favorite coffee shop, writing Deep Black, which is the sequel to Artifact Space.
Yes.
And that was super fun.
That's awesome. And yeah, definitely check out Christian Cameron on Instagram, guys. And that leads nicely into one of the questions that we wanted to make sure we asked. So Artifact Space is book 1 of your new sci-fi series called The Arcana Imperii. And one of the things we wanted to make sure we asked is, what can we expect from Deep Black, which is book 2?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't know, and I'm going to tell you guys the truth. The truth is, depending on sales, there will be more books or there won't. This is a kind of a risk for me. Sure. It's not that big a risk because I've admitted that it took 45 or 46 days to write. But sure. I'm not a sci-fi writer. I'm an epic fantasy writer. And it's possible that no one's going to care, and I'm not going to sell enough copies. See, I sold this on a 1-book contract. So I don't have a contract for a sequel. I'll admit to you that I could write 50 of these. They might not all be about Envaro, but like the other day I had this is going to sound very odd. I had a whole plot in my head for a story about an agriculturalist on Sahel, and a plot like with action. It's not just like, the day-to-day life of a sci-fi agriculturalist, but that was part of the point, was like, you know, sci-fi epic is always about like spaceships. What's it like about just dealing with technology, trying to preserve a biome, trying to grow Earth crops while not destroying the alien? Like, I thought of a whole sort of environmentalist plot, complete with like anti-environmentalist sort of capitalist greed terrorism, and thought like, this is a good idea for a novel. And because I'd already set up Sahel and the way it worked, I was like, I've got all this. This would make a really good book. I'd love to write more books in this universe. And I can tell you a little about what Deep Black is about. But I will say, if Artifact Space sells, I'd like there to be 3 of these. And we'll call that the main sequence. And then I might write some novellas about agriculturalists or assassins, or like, I'd love to write a novella about the main political plot, which frankly is invisible to Envaro, because it's all going on back at New London. So she's seeing like the terrorism, but she has no idea really what the why or the economic impact. And I'd love to have a novella from a different point of view. There. So the main action is really about a murder mystery. Spoiler, major spoiler. And the murder mystery is the murder of the circles, right? There was a race 100,000 years ago on a bunch of planets, and they had a high culture, and then they all died out in a very short amount of time. Let me give you a spoiler from the beginning of Deep Black. So
you've been warned.
Very early in Deep Black, someone discovers a piece of that same alien carbon fiber with the writing on the station at Trade Point.
Interesting. Yeah, because the way you described those creatures almost being like mechanical definitely raised some suspicions for me.
So 100,000 years ago, somebody wiped out an entire alien race. As far as the characters know, who did that? And
what's up with that?
And do people need to worry about that? And that is the real main plot. That is what Deep Black is really about. And I don't know how much to give away to you guys. I've never been in this position.
Well, whatever you feel comfortable with, anything with artifact space and whatever you can give us for Deep Black.
The title kind of gives away the main action. And Barrow and some people are going to go far off into space, basically exploring. But without giving away the whole plot, I want to remind you that the DHC is not a military organization. It's a trade organization.
Yeah.
And so it's not about finding a giant space battle. It's about trying to protect trade. And I think it's going to be as good. I hope people like Artifact Space, but I'm very excited by the plot because one of my favorite things, we talked about this the first time, is to defy the expectations of the genre. It's something that I love to do. And I want to do it in a way that you enjoy. Like, I'm not going to go like, ooh, epic fantasy, no sword fights at all. Nope, that is not my idea of defying the expectations. But I do like playing with those expectations and either delaying your gratification or inverting it. So I promise that Deep Black will have a space battle, but I don't think it will happen the way anybody expects or be the space battle that they expect. And I'll be honest, the expected space battle is like the Athens against the bubble aliens for keeps. But I promise you that's not what's happening. And and in fact, good times will be had by all. I will say that all the clues are in Artifact Space. If you've read Artifact Space carefully, you can guess what has gone on. But
well,
there we go.
So Christian, I was like deep in my feelings about this idea of there not being a Deep Black if Artifact Space doesn't sell as well as you're hoping for, because I feel like there's so much you've built in Artifact Space that are still these loose threads that I'm like, I feel like this compulsion, this need to have tied together.
Don't worry. Yeah. I'm friends with Dirk and Ben Galley, and I know lots of indie writers. I know how to do it. I've written enough of Deep Black that I'm not going to deep six it. So
great.
I'm going to say if it doesn't get picked up, I'll probably just self-publish it for fun. Because frankly, enough people have written reviews that I figure, all right, I can't leave you hanging. And I'll tell you a weird thing about me. I also want to know what happens. Doesn't that sound weird?
That makes total sense. No, I think so.
So if it does sell, there will be 3 books, and the 3rd book will be basically coming home. One of my favorite reviews so far said, I will hate you forever if Embaro doesn't save Sarah. And I wrote back and said, fear not, because like that is the culmination, and coming home will be about the politics that you really haven't understood, and Embaro having to face all that should be fun.
Yeah, and
yes,
I'm sure you'll get into like, I don't want to get too deep into this, but like the way that how time has passed back in New London and things like that. I'm wondering how that would play an effect on trying to save Sarah as well. It's like, how long has it been relative to Sarah, relative to Embaro? Like, there's a lot of really interesting potential there that I would love to read. And I do also want to shine light, like you said, there are a lot of reviews both on Goodreads and Amazon, and your book is rated very highly. You have nearly 200 reviews on both places, and your reviews are basically 5 stars across the board. So
I have never written a book with this high reviews.
Yeah.
But reviews aren't sales.
Yes.
And, you guys accused me of being too humble, but this is my 43rd book, I'm pretty sure. And something I've learned is that reviews aren't sales.
Yeah.
And that I got a Times Literary Supplement review on my science fiction novel. I have never gotten a Times Literary Supplement review on any fantasy I've ever written. So that was weird. But that didn't bump my Amazon rating by, anyway, it's a business, gentlemen. It's a business.
It's a business.
Yeah.
People got to speak with their dollars, not just their words, It's
I've
one thing to
I've
say
gotta
you
pay the
like
bills.
it.
I have a mortgage and a kid just about to go to university, and we know what that means.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So, I was about to say a phrase my wife hates. I won't say it. But
maybe off the air.
I fired Artifact Space out there. Hopefully, Gallants will pick up 3 of them, and and it'll be super fun. And eventually, I'll get to write some novellas to fill out the sort of universe, and Netflix will pick it up for a 20 episode.
I think Christopher Nolan would have a great time with this, with all the time stuff and right? He's always really into all that. So I don't know, it was giving me those kind of vibes when I was reading it. And I was like, oh, he'd love this. Just even the stuff with like an attack being set in the way past, but in some ways that doesn't, they were over prepared because they didn't know where things would be in the future. And I'm like, I don't know, that stuff. It's really impressive science. Kind of stuff that I think Chris Nolan would love. And I don't know, I vision, I'm a dreamer, Christian, but I envision those kind of things as something that would be pretty awesome.
I'm going to make a nerdy, arrogant statement to all your fans and say, one of the things I really wanted to accomplish in this science fiction novel, even though I don't see it as military sci-fi, I see it as just like sci-fi, is to try and make space battle tactics make sense. Because quite frankly, usually when I read them, I go, no, don't believe that. That's not how it works. We already have ECM better than that. There's some good, solid military sci-fi, but often I think, have you guys ever done a big simulator? I'm not sure that everybody has thought of the ramifications of time delay, on communications. And I thought The Expanse was the first show I'd ever watched that indicated that basically the whole combat is going to happen in about 3/4 of a second. The moment 2 computer systems come in range. And then right now we have radars will work in space that will individual slug coming out of a close-in weapon system that's firing the slugs so close together they're virtually a solid stream of depleted uranium. And you can track every one of those, and which they show on The Expanse, right? Where they kind of show the curl of fire as the 2 ships maneuver in 3D. Do you remember this fantastic
I'm
episode?
actually about to start watching The Expanse.
Okay.
So that's next up on my TV list. So I'm listening.
Like anyone ever showed that Captain Kirk is not saying fire the photon torpedoes, because the length of time it takes him to say those words, the fight's over.
Because in Artifact Space, it's you took the time to mention, it's it's all done by computers, so it's it happens faster than anyone could process or give a command, which to me is very sci-fi. And it's that would be true if we live in a world where we can launch massive things into space. We've got to have programmatically solve battle tactics,
Yeah, and the slowest thing even on a modern battlefield is the human being. So imagine 600 years in the future, and I just wanted to get that across. And again, all praise to Corey and the folks who make Expanse. They got that, but I feel like most sci-fi is still thinking it's World War II submarine combat.
Right.
Not speed of light communication. And yet at the same time, what Dylan was talking about is also real. And I'm not a mathematician, and I'm not a very good scientist. So I had tables with things laid out and little notes pinned to them going if this ship jumped at point X and this ship enters the system at point Y, do they ever see them? And I'm like, have I got this right? And I'm literally asking.
Science fiction writer problem.
It's so
like.
but it was so cool because it was so like interstellar, and I love that movie. And I'm just thinking about the ramifications now of doing all this time skipping. What that's gonna mean.
I keep waiting for someone to write me a note, like 1-star review, like you got all the math wrong. The jumping out ship sees everything. I'm like, no, I was so careful.
Yeah, that's true. But it's science fiction, people.
Well, I think that's kind of the risk, right? The difference between calling it space opera and calling it science fiction is when you start calling it science fiction, then people start getting all these expectations that you got all the science and the math right. But space opera kind of opens you up to this more like, oh, we're having fun out there. And I feel like, yeah, it's that balance we're talking about there, where it feels like it has the thought of a science fiction novel in it, but the fun of a space opera. Like,
well, thank you once again. You're my favorite critics. That's what I was aiming for. And
Dylan, can we blurb that?
It's funny. A very good and nice review nonetheless said that, I forget exactly what they said, but they basically said this was kind of light or lightweight or whatever. And that's an interesting point of view, because I want books to be about hope. And I'd like to hope that the future isn't like all doom and gloom. Is that light? Maybe it is light. I don't know. I wanted it to be fun. When I read sci-fi as a kid, while it was often very, like even Star Trek, very thoughtful, mostly it was fun. Right. Leaving aside the endless sexual harassment of his own officers on the bridge and other problems that you see in Star Trek, leaving all that aside, it's fun. And I did want it to be fun. Yep, that is true. So sometimes I wanted to bore you, and sometimes I wanted it to be fun.
Well, I always prefer the intent to entertain me as a reader rather than like dump all of this sci-fi theory. Like, I love science fiction, but sometimes you can read one that's a bit more dense. But no, I love all the different like time dilation stuff. You get into economics. You also get into like the communication between alien races. And I was wondering if you had seen the movie Arrival. Christian, have you seen that?
So good. Christian,
you haven't seen
You gotta check that out. It's so good.
Your communication
we talked about
with
watch
the starfish,
party stuff,
right?
I don't know, Christian. That's a freaking
highly.
We'll talk off the air about it.
We'll talk about it.
I would love to watch.
I got Arrival vibes.
So good.
Different, but like very interesting.
Oh, I'm glad they're different. You were scaring me. I'm like, what?
No, it doesn't.
No, because the whole movie is about Amy Adams trying to communicate with an alien race that only speaks in like inkblot circles, and she's trying to like decode it and communicate back to them, much like you have characters trying to communicate with the starfish. Right. So they have these moments where it's like, okay, we're going to try and communicate with them, and they like go into their spaceship and like experiment with signals and stuff. There's time dilation things going on. Yeah, highly recommend it. Yeah, that's a great movie. But so, I get all to say that I was very impressed with the amount of science fiction science elements, as like this is your debut science fiction novel, right? So I can imagine what kind of undertaking that must have been to.
So I really wanted to be a marine biologist, and I ended up as a medieval historian.
Starfish.
So, the starfish definitely just straight out of my 6th grade trip to Woods Hole in Massachusetts, which is like the center of marine biology on the East Coast. And, I do know all the fancy words for parts of sea anemones and stuff like that. And it's one of the most interesting. I'm going to answer a question you didn't ask. One of the most interesting parts of the novel for me is that Inbaro isn't me. I'm a ludicrously social extrovert. And it was super fun writing a character who isn't me. And like, okay, I'm not saying that any of my other characters is necessarily me, except Tom Swan, who's pretty much absolutely me. But and is a shameful kind of train wreck. But it was very interesting, and I did have a couple of real people in mind who maybe had tougher, youthful lives, and who I've known pretty well. But it was really interesting writing somebody who wasn't me.
Hmm.
But there is a character who's largely like me a lot of the time, and that's Dorcas. Dorcas just knows a little bit about everything.
Yeah.
Right? And he's just like endlessly providing
I see that.
the information nobody really wants to hear right then. That's me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's funny when they like towards the end, they're all at the lunch table, just goading them into conversations, having fun like that.
Ask my friends what they do at lunch tables.
Hey, that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Goading
So
you
let's just poke him and see what he'll tell us about faster than light drive. And
yes.
It was actually fun caricaturing myself. And I haven't really done that in a book before. And I really enjoyed it. And I went back and I actually sort of tarted it up at one point. I was like, no, I'm going to make this even more of a caricature. And hopefully he's funny. He's meant to be a kind of like, he has his moments, but he's kind of funny. And he's almost the comic relief. And yet he's also Spock, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
In Deep Black, I play a lot more with the neural lace. In fact, the neural laces are beginning to take over Deep Black because I'm trying, and this gets back to your comments about science fiction. I'm trying to like get through my head what it would be like to actually have an ability to directly interrelate with the whole computer system of a ship.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, do you realize, I only realized this after I'd written 150 pages. If all of the officers have neural laces, you don't need a bridge, right? It's exactly like working from home taken to its logical conclusion.
Right.
You don't need a nerve center for the command and control because wherever they are, they can immediately read any function.
Right.
And they can directly interface. Like you don't need to look at a screen showing radar returns. You can read the radar returns yourself, like you were the original machine. And I keep rewriting these scenes going, oh no, they wouldn't do that. No, they wouldn't. Oh my God, they wouldn't do that either. Like, anyway,
I can imagine.
I feel like I need to sit down for 12 hours with somebody who's like in the AI synergy business and go like, okay, tell me where it's going.
Right.
And then just this morning, I discovered I get a magazine called Nautilus, which I want to recommend to you. And I know that only old people read magazines, but it's a science magazine and it has never steered me wrong. And it's just
Nautilus.
Yeah.
Nautilus.
It's like what we used to call in university physics for poets. It's like, here's the latest direction in deep space telescopes explained to you with your lack of math.
Oh.
So I
have lack of math.
I love Nautilus magazine. And this morning, because of it, I bought a book called The Zoology of the Galaxy. No, A Zoologist's Guide to the Galaxy. And it's a whole bunch of Earth zoologists describing how they think alien life will work. Anyway, I bought it this morning because I'm like, I definitely need that. Because and now I'm going to tell stories against myself. In artifact space, I'm very careful not to tell you too much about the starfish. Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'm getting to the point where I have to tell you more about the starfish, and now I need to know.
It's like, oh gosh, I guess I gotta go plan out this whole alien race now.
Yeah, I see. I have two options here: blow up the space station and kill all the starfish, or start telling you how this all works.
Well, I want to know how it works.
Yeah,
so.
Given the ending of Artifact Space, I have a feeling it's going to play an important... It would be funny if, like, you start Deep Black with just all the starfish exploding. If that happens, I'll know where your thought process was.
Yeah.
The sad truth is that it's a little like that. It does start with a bang.
Interesting, because I know Artifact Space was more of a slow burn, and I know you did that intentionally. So that will be very interesting. And I just, want to be respectful of your time, Christian. We could go on forever. I have so many more little questions.
Why don't we get together again sometime?
Yes.
Yes.
But let me reiterate.
Definitely.
Let me sum up.
Yes.
Let me explain. No, let me sum up. I'm hoping there's 3 books. The second book will be about trying to solve the mystery of 2 mysteries. How does xenoglass get made? Mm-hmm. What happened to the circles, the mysterious race that appears to have died out?
Yeah.
via the agency of a non-government that is mostly interested in establishing and protecting trade. The third book which I have only tentatively called Coming Home, because that's a dumb title, and I'll come up with a title that goes with Artifact Space and Deep Black. But let's just call it Coming Home. Will be about coming home. And it will be another kind of science fiction novel, much more Blade Runner-ish, much more like the nitty-gritty of what it's like to live inside the DHC, because that I want to have fun with that too, right? Because it's I think even in the bits you see in Artifact Space, I hope you go, cool orbitals, cool like ideas for what these societies are like. So I want to have a whole book to play in those societies. So that's what I hope I get to do. And if everyone you know and all their friends go out and buy a copy, I'll probably
yes. So that's the thing, Christian. It's that so it's important to me that we get to Coming Home, whatever it ends up being called. And what can we do? What can our listeners do to help make sure that happens? It's just buy it. Yeah.
Just buy it and review it on Amazon or Goodreads.
Okay.
Or really anything else. I don't mean to back Amazon like I'm an Amazon supporter, because I'll be
it's complicated. It's got yes.
It's a complicated relationship.
We get it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to date other people. I don't know. It's hard. One more non-spoiler that I want to get across before we close out. There will be more sword fights.
Ooh, that's important because we didn't
get the chance anything to talk less from the creator of Writing Fighting.
Maybe we took for granted the fact that the fight scenes are incredible because it's you and we know that, but I want to make sure we say that out loud, which they are really incredible. And the swords in space and also just space battles, like they really, really awesome. So, and I'm looking forward to way more of that and seeing Morrow get out there with the sword.
Hey, I have a question for you guys, literally. So it's about space battles. So I chose to have the climactic battle not be the end battle.
Yeah.
Right? And that was, again, a defy expectations thing, because to me, there's a falseness to that plot arc. And because I thought I had plenty of excitement dealing with aliens for the end, and I didn't need to have the fancy space battle also be the end. How did you feel about that?
I felt like... So it's interesting because I felt like, we've got nukes and stuff going on in the big like climactic stuff, and that feels like plot wise much more intense and bigger. But then things like her friends, like Thea being in danger and things like that, feel character wise to be extreme climax stuff going on. So I guess I thought of it as kind of like, to me, I'm a very character focused reader. So when I'm like, wait, where's Thea? What's going on there? Like that stuff, I was really invested in Umbaro and Thea's relationship. Like that stuff felt like climax to me too, I guess, you get what I'm saying?
It was meant to. So that was my way of playing that. And I have to tell you another quick story. One of my best friends and one of the women who helped make the character of Thea, she's like, you've done it again. I've killed her before in novels. She's like, I stopped reading on this page, and then it turned out, I won't spoiler that. But she's like, sure, you did it again. You killed me again, you bastard.
Yeah.
Too much fun. Can't help it.
It's
No, like for me personally, like from the beginning of the way you set the story up with the slow burn, and we were talking about plot elements happening in between all of these other moments that you've drawn on from experience, that to me is what Artifact Space is. So to end it with like this climactic space battle almost kind of goes against this whole story that you've written. So to me, it kind of doubled down on what I appreciated most about this book and your writing style going into this book of like, things will happen when they happen, and it's not going to always be according to plan, and sometimes they're going to be fast, and there's all these different plot threads looming over Umbaro at all times, but it doesn't like dominate her mind and her story. The story is her like navigating her life and slowly realizing that she has found a family and that she has grown into this leadership position. So the fact that the action happened and we got to see her kind of take command and do all these really cool things, excellent. But does it need to be this cinematic moment at the end? It's like that kind of is not the story structure where you were going. So to me, it's like I just love seeing an author do their thing, and the fact that you're able to commit to that and bring it home and still have a very interesting ending that leaves things open-ended with the starfish and all of that. It's like, that's all I needed to see. I'm not going to get upset because there's no like, oh, where's the rising action here? You know, like, where's the climax? It happened. We got it. And it's delivered in this matter-of-fact way of like, here's what life is really like on this spaceship. It doesn't end with the huge explosion. There's, you know, fallout from what happens, and then there's more stuff that happens, and there's scientific research going on, and like, we're still gonna have lunch and all these other things. So I thought it was great.
Yeah, you know, the other day when we were talking, I think it was Sebastian de Castel said, ultimately books are about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, ultimately this book is about relationships.
Yep.
Big surprise. That's what books are mostly about.
Yes. Guys.
Yeah, that's how Mark Lawrence describes the Book of the Ancestor as well, as being about relationships. And that's I'm reading One Word Kill now, and that's awesome too. But it's speaking of like getting involved in some different genres and whatnot. And like, I'll say I guess I want to spoil Book of the Ancestor in here, but my favorite relationship, or one of my two favorite relationships in Mark Lawrence's book, The Ancestor, reminds me a lot of the way Umbaro and Thea interact. I was really loving that, and I can tell this is a book about relationships, and it's so strong, and it allows for it to have these like multiple climaxes, and where the plot focused readers get theirs, and the more relationship and character focused ones get theirs too. And it ends with a bang in that sense. And yeah, I love it.
All right.
I'm gonna end by saying one of the things I was also trying to get across, I'm just riffing off of what both of you say, is that you know, my experience of the Gulf War, for example, is you think that when you know you're gonna like get in an airplane and do something super dangerous in 12 hours that you'd worry about that. I mean, I'm as much of a coward as anybody in you, but really what you're worried about is your next hamburger. Like, am I gonna get to eat now? Is there any time to sleep? And it's the human brain is just superbly adaptable. There will be time to be terrified later. Right now, what I want is a burger. And so your whole focus anyway, and I try to capture that with Nabarro. I only say that because somebody's like, she seems over focused on her day-to-day life. And I'm like, no, that's life on shipboard. You're like,
that's the human experience.
Yeah.
Get up. Oh, now what am I doing? Anyway?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a crisis. Oh, the crisis is over. Eat.
Yeah. Right. And that's where this book really stands out to me. All of these genuine experiences that you've had in your understanding of life on ships and the human condition during, like, in a military setting, it all shines. And that's the reason you would pick up this book. And then there's just the added benefit of all these really interesting sci-fi elements with space travel, aliens, like weapons, and it's just really well done. So I just wanted to congratulate you on an awesome release, and you know, we really enjoyed the book.
Well, that is music to my ears, and thanks for having me. And like, let's do this again.
Yes, I know there's so many. There's
definitely
a million little things that I could think of taking your time up with, but I won't do it because it seems like we're coming to such a nice little conclusion here. I will say
later, though.
We will do it later for certain, but for now, guys, check out Artifact Space by Miles Cameron, Christian Cameron, depending on what you read. But in this case, Miles Cameron. I also listened to the audiobook, which I thought was great. I purchased the audiobook as well.
Mm-hmm. She was so great. Yeah.
Yeah. And Aneka Okoye, I'm going to try and pronounce. But yeah, she was excellent.
And I actually listened to the whole thing. I was just going to listen to a snippet. And then I was like...
I had to keep going.
Yeah, so either way, it's, you know, you can get it in Kindle or audiobook or, you know, whatever works for you guys, but highly, highly recommend. I mean, we've already recommended it at the top, and now we're in the spoiler section, so it is what it is. But tell your friends, for all you people that are listening, let's get this
write
book
those
going.
Reviews.
Yeah, write those reviews.
We got to write ours.
Yes, we will write ours. Now that
get on that, boys.
Yeah, I know.
We don't use those as much as
we've never really
but we
written
get
a
on
review.
there.
We've written like one review.
A little, yeah. for
So,
Levi.
but we will, yeah.
Our
we wrote,
guests.
yeah, we
our
wrote
guests
one
come
for
on,
our
but
guests,
we gotta
and we'll
get
write
more
one
on
for
it.
you as well. Yeah, we have to get on it. We just don't think of ourselves as
we'll
reviewers,
do it.
but we will.
Yeah,
And we're going to give it 5 stars.
We're looking-
Spoiler.
obviously.
So
yes.
obviously. And yeah, if you enjoyed the book, that's where you can go get it. That's where you can tell your friends to go. But also be sure to check out Christian Cameron on his website, christiancameronauthor.com, and all the social media channels. Folkion1, highly recommend. Writing Fighting is coming back, guys, and you are not going to want to miss it when it comes back. So be sure to give
9
him
more
a
days.
follow. 9 more days,
and I'll be back.
It'll be
full-time.
even less by the time this airs, so it'll be like
That's true.
it'll be like,
Right.
just a few days. So you still have some time, guys. You don't want to wait too long. And that's Folkion1, and we'll put all the links in the description and all of that. But Christian, anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap things up today?
No, you guys have literally covered virtually everything, and I look forward to coming back to sell you on Deep Black or Against All Gods.
You don't
I'm
have.
about
You've
to
already
go-
sold us on that.
I'm about to
but
go all
we can
fantasy
tell our
on
listeners.
Against All Gods and go back to my normal epic fantasy life. So we'll talk about Against All Gods next.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we
for
can,
sure. Yeah.
if we hopefully we can wait that long. Otherwise, doors always open to have you back,
yeah.
Christian. And anyway,
Camping
we can
in the
collaborate.
Adirondacks.
Camping.
Yes.
Camping.
Yes, just tell us when we'll
we
be
gotta.
there.
Yeah, we gotta flesh that out, but that as that's
Yeah.
number one right now.
Yeah, we won't hold you to it
Well,
on
we
air,
gotta
but we're
do
going to
it.
try to make it happen. Because it's just
I will do
always a
everything in my
pleasure
power.
having you on. Yes, anything in our power to make happen, we will do. And just, guys, come on. Christian Cameron, such a generous interviewee and author, and definitely want to check
Wonderful
him out.
person.
Wonderful person, yes. And thank you for coming on.
You guys are burying me in flowers, as Italians say. See you guys.
All right. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We greatly appreciate it. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.